Hello, I'm Ian. Welcome to my workshop and to the 7th part in this introductory series where we're making a pair of piston fit cube boxes. So the cube boxes project is one of my favourites, and I designed it over 8 years ago to really introduce the newcomer to working to much finer tolerances. So the idea is you make a matched pair of boxes, piston fit boxes, and they should be cubes. So if you put one on its side, then they should still be level. And both of the piston fit lids should glide down either way round, any way round on their original bases, and any way round on its neighbour's base. And therein lies the challenge. Now, to achieve that, you have to work meticulously throughout the making process and ensure all of your component parts are within very fine tolerances. But it's a relatively simple construction. To make the case or the box is just mitre joints. To do that, you'll use your jack plane and you'll need a dedicated mitre shooting board. Plans for mine are available on my website, or you can design your own. To dress the mating surfaces, you'll use your block plane to get a very fine shut line. Then the lids are held in with a little groove created with a plough plane, and a rebate on the lids created with a rebate plane. So you can go to my website and download the plans and the build notes for this project and all the other projects on the course completely free of charge. So one of the first exercises we'll do is to make the inner sleeve, and to make ensure it's square, we'll make a mould. So this is 3 pieces of 18mm ply glued together and then planed all round until I got it to fine tolerances. And to ensure that it's square, you'll need a precision square. Now, you can pay a lot of money for precision squares, but for this project and for really everything going forwards, you will need to get yourself a known precision square. So this particular model is a recalibratable square, and just before this video I took the whole thing apart. I cleaned up this blade at the 2 edges to ensure they're back to parallel, and any dings or marks or nicks it had in it, I took those out and then recalibrated it until it's 90 degrees. Now I'll show you how you do that, and you will need a rule or a straight edge and a piece of scrap man-made board. This is 3mm MDF. I've shot an edge on it, or an end, and it doesn't really matter what the angle is, provided it's roughly 90 degrees to the centre line. So the first thing I'll do is pull the board and make sure it's clear of the edge of the bench. So the square isn't going to foul on the bench and give me a false reading. So that's my nice clean edge. Put the square onto it and hold it down. Put the straight edge up to the square and just push it back and forth to make sure it's not fouling on anything. So I'm looking at a little marking on the MDF, any kind of little dot or fleck or something. As I push this, slide the straight edge back and forth, it's still tracking true. It's not going off at an angle. I'm not interfering with it. It's just literally just going forwards and backwards. So make sure everything's true. Hold it down nice and tight, and then I'll put normally I'll just put a little dot or a little line at one end and at the other, but for this instance I'll pull a white line along the whole thing. Now as I'm doing this, I'm just rotating this pencil, so I put a nice crisp edge right up to the edge of the roll. Then flip the square over onto the other side and do exactly the same. Now as I push the square up, that line should be absolutely parallel to my roll, and it should disappear at exactly the same time. So there it is, and then it all disappears. So it's not like that, or it's not like that. Now this is quite a thick line, just for your benefit. Normally I would do a knife cut and drop the blade in to the knife cut at the bottom edge, make it good, and then check that the blade is in exactly the same position at the top edge. So to begin with, I'm just going to prepare both of these surfaces that are quite out of step at the moment. I haven't calibrated anything, I haven't checked anything, I'm just going to literally prep one surface, make it flat, flip it over and prep the other surface and make it flat. So when I put it on the bench, it's not going to walk all over the place or start rocking. And then when I've done that, then we can start checking and seeing how we're doing for our 90 degrees and where any adjustments need to be made. Okay, so that's four flat surfaces, the two that we've just dressed, and then the sides that the ply already had. I don't actually know how flat they are yet, so we'll check that as well in a minute. But now to check the actual 90 degrees, once we've calibrated our square or checked our square, the best way to do it for real precision is to get your lamp and hold it right in front of the workpiece, and then you'll see any tiny little bits of light that may or may not be coming through. And your square should literally just cut the light, so there's absolutely nothing peeking through underneath your workpiece. So this is clearly a little high on this near edge. I can just rock it a little and cut the light, and there it is. And that is pretty much the same all the way down. Yeah, same there. The other side is the opposite way. It's a little bit high on the far side. You need to take some time over this and get it absolutely, or as good as you can possibly get it, all the way around until we end up with a 50mm square block that's nice and true. And there are no hiding places in this exercise, so if you get it nice and accurate, then the next piece will work even better, and you'll end up with a nice piston fit, slow descending lids. It doesn't really matter if it's 50mm or it's 48 or 47.5, whatever it happens to end up with is fine. It's just so long as it's the same on all four faces. It just means your boxes will be a little bit smaller. But we'll try and shoot for 50mm and see how we go. Okay, so I think we're there. That's the reference surface. Calipers on the reference surface. Up to 0. Smidging under. Up to 0. Okay, so now a little check with the square, and you have to be honest, I really can't detect any tipping on any face. Which, if everything was correct and we've taken our time hitting those dimensions, working our way around from a reference face side, face edge, then using the reference edge to determine the other one, then there's no reason why it shouldn't be nice and true. Good. Now, you don't need to do the ends, but while I'm here, I might just as well clean those up and put a tiny chamfer on just to assist when we work the sleeve or the insert onto it. Just like in the sawhorse exercise, this thumb is putting a lot of pressure in the middle of the plane just to keep it absolutely flat to the workpiece, keep the sole down and nice and even. I'm just working a flat surface. I'm not trying to bend it or take any corners off. I'm just putting in a nice flat datum. So that shouldn't rock. Okay, so this is all nicely dressed, and just check it for square. So strong light, low raking light, and then just use your square and cut the light. There shouldn't be any little peaks, just nice crisp work. Same the other way. And it should of course be square on all faces. You get the gist. Right, so happy with that. I'll just pop some chamfers on it just so it's easier to get the sleeve on when we're working the next piece, the insert. Flip it round, do the other side, and that will be the mould complete. So I'll put a chamfer on all the edges, the ends and the long edges. So when we come to glue up the inner sleeve, which is just a butt mitered joint, any squeeze out, and it's not going to adhere itself to the mould itself, so we'll be able to slide the insert on and off. So that's all done, happy with that. However, planing all that plywood has taken its toll on our plane irons, our blades. So these, I can feel they're getting a little dull, lost their edge. So before I do anything else, I shall resharpen these. So this is a box I made years ago, and it still piston fits. And the reason it still does that is because of the grain orientation. So this is the part we're going to be making next, this inner sleeve, this insert. And to do that, we shall wrap this cherry around our mould. Now it's important that the grain direction runs horizontally. So as this part absorbs and releases moisture through seasonal movement over the course of its lifetime, it'll expand very, very slightly, almost unnoticeably across the long grain, but the height will increase and decrease ever so slightly through seasonal movement. Now that's not a problem. So if we ensure that the grain orientation for the insert runs horizontally and the grain orientation for the casing also runs horizontally, then there's no conflicts of interest and everything will expand and shrink at the same rates throughout the piece's life. So what I'm going to do is prep the other half of this board. One face has already been prepped. So I have a cutting gauge that is bevel out. So the bevel is on the far side. And it's a clean, flat shoulder on the inside. I've set that to 5mm. This is about 6. And I shall run a gauge line across both edges. And then using a rebate plane, I shall just cut back those corners until I'm down to my knife line or gauge line, and then using the 5.5, clean up the rest of it until it's all down to 5mm thick dimension. Now the part I actually need is only, and even oversized, it's only 250 wide or length by about 125 in height. So it's only about that big. I've got enough to easily get 2 out of it, but I'll still prep the whole board so I can use it in the next project. Okay, so that's given me a nice crisp single line to work to. So this is my rebate plane, or the one I'm going to be using. It's a Record 778, which is a slightly improved version of a Stanley 78. And I'll set the iron at a slight skew. So we're cutting here up to the fence, it's engaged. Yet in the middle it's just touching, and at the edge, or the furthest extent, it's not touching at all. And the reason I've done that is because I shall now offer it up to the workpiece, and I want to put a chamfer, a very slight chamfer on this edge. I don't want to really mess up too much of the middle of the board. So I shall keep planing away until I just go to that little knife line that the cutting gauge left. I'll flip it around, do both sides, and then I know that those are my datums, and then I don't have to keep checking my edge as I flatten the rest of the top. So you can see, hopefully, that there's no actual rebate cut into that. It is just a slope. So the plane is literally just feathering out into nothing, and hopefully you can just pick up that there are little areas. It looks like it's got a paler edge, and that's where it's very, very thin. There's literally just the gauge line underneath there. There's a little bit of wood just flapping on the edge. So I'll just plane that off, then we'll be right to our gauge line. So what you end up with is effectively a shoulder that is exactly down to the final dimension that we're looking for. So that very edge is just flaked off and left me with a perfect 5mm shoulder line, which I can now plane this top down to just until I absolutely, the final few strokes, just kiss that very edge. Then what that means is I don't have to keep checking or stopping what I'm doing and looking at the edge to see where my gauge line is. I can just keep it clamped down and just keep planing the top until I get to that very edge, and that's the same on both sides. Okay, so it's cramped on the worktop. Now this is going to need quite a lot of precision and care, so I'm going to set the iron very fine and make sure it's absolutely true in the blade and not in the plane, and not at all skewed. When you're working with stock as thin as this, you can't just put it on the workpiece and start planing away and then gauging how your blade is set. You need to do it before you even approach your workpiece, or you'll just run out of material. I've got a knot here, which shouldn't cause us any problem, but just something to look out for. The first few strokes are going to do almost nothing. So you take all the high spots off from the bandsaw, and then we'll gradually start to take deeper and deeper, or wider and wider cuts. So all the time I'm just feeling what the plane is doing, and it's telling me how this wood is sort of where the fibres might be and where it's making any cuts. So I'm just going to skew the blade a little and start taking some nice wider shavings. Okay, so this has definitely got a scoop in the middle. I'll keep working this until we can get some nice even width shavings. It's quite a way to go yet. Okay, so we've got a few marks here where it's still the bandsaw marks showing, and a few lines here. Still not down to dimension, and quite a little bit to come off of this side, but it's getting there. Okay, so that's pretty much it. It feels like glass, it's silky smooth. You couldn't possibly get this finish with a thicknesser, as that's a rotary tool and it will just cut scallops out of everything. And I need to create 4 sections just over 60mm wide on each. Then I can mitre the long edges on each section. That can be wrapped around our mould, and that will be enough to create both inserts for both boxes. So this is my mitre shooting board. It's very simple. The plane is held in or at least rests in a track, and it's supported by this top arm, which is completely adjustable to fine tune the mitre or the angle. The stock goes in up to the blade, or up to the sole of the plane, and then just shoot the edge. So to begin with, I'll shoot a nice 45 on one edge, then clean up the second face and making sure that everything's parallel. Then this is the master one that I've already calibrated to be the right size. Then I'll put the new piece up against it, and what I'm looking for is that the miters just meet right at a single point. So at the moment this is obviously too big, it needs some taken off, but when it looks like just like that, and there's no, in other words, I can't decide which one is longer than the other, then I've hit my dimension. I'll do that on all 4 pieces until they're all, or the next 3 at least, until they're all exactly the same as the master. Right, and there we are. both meet an absolute point. Okay, let's put them together and see how we're doing. So you don't want them absolutely too tight, just get the points just touching. We don't want overlapping, just nicely touching is ample. Get some tape. Tiny bit of stretch, but not too much. I don't want it just to be pulled so tight that everything overlaps. I just want it held in its original or correct place. And we'll see if any more need to come off or if they're ready for glue. And then build up your piece, pull it nice and tight, a little bit more pressure just to close up that last joint. Have a little look, make sure there's no daylight showing on any of these joints, they're all nicely closed. And then give it a little wiggle, make sure it's seated, and then see if our mould fits. And it does. And has it popped any joints? No, it hasn't. Ooh. Turn it around. Good. And the other way. Lovely. Great, so that's ready for glue. So I've got my 4 cramping blocks, each with 3 slots in them to accept the cord. And the cord is a man-made cord. It's just, I think it's polyethylene, I'm not entirely sure. Can't remember exactly. A little block with 3 holes in it and a slot, and then the cord is knotted at one end through the first hole. The loop becomes the actual tensioning part, or what goes around the blocks. Then the third hole in the slot adds all the tension to the cramp. It's very simple. So I'll do a dry run. Here's my 4 pieces, put those together, and always do a dry run so everything is ready to go. Assemble the blocks. First loop. Get a bit of tension. That'll do for the minute, not too much. Second loop, and I try and put the tensioning parts in different places, so I'm pulling more of an even pressure around the workpiece. So I'll stick this one this side. Now I can just loosen this off and leave it assembled. Pull out my workpiece. All I've got to do is glue this up, drop it in, tighten it up, and we're all done. Okay, so regular PVA, nothing fancy. And I don't want tons of it. I don't want tons and tons of squeeze out, just enough to do the job. And wet out both faces of each joint, and you'll get a much better glue line. Now, as soon as you add the glue, it all starts to get a bit slippy, slidey, but the cramps will sort all that out. And the beauty with having mitre cramps is that they pull everything in evenly. So if it is a little bit out of true, the cramps will sort it out. Whereas straight cramps are likely to just push something even further out of true. Right, so just clean up any obvious excess to begin with. It's not really going to be an issue, but you might just as well. Right, that's all looking Pretty good. Hardly any squeeze out on the inside, just a tiny, tiny few little bits, but we can get in there at the end. This should still fit, just, and it does. And drop the whole thing in our pre-prepared cramping arrangement. Put the mould in to make sure everything's nice and pulls up true, and then pull in all the cramps, and that should be really tight, and it is. And there we go. That's it, leave that overnight and we should have a nicely formed, completely square inner insert sleeve for our box. Okay, so gluing it up overnight is really all it needs. This has actually been glued up for 6 days because I've just come back from demonstrating at a woodworking show, and all the strings are all still nice and taut, which is good. And can I move the mould? Oh, that's quite handy. Oh yes, good. So the mould moves just about, which is a good sign, which means then we haven't had too much squeeze out. There's bound to be a little bit of squeeze out in the joint, but that's minimal, and because we chamfered the edges of our mould, it shouldn't have stuck, and it clearly hasn't. Looking at the corners, they're all looking rather good. There's no obvious squeeze out. A few little things just to tidy up, and nothing much, which is exactly what we wanted. We don't want gallons of squeeze out all over the place, or it will just stick itself to the cramps and then you're in all sorts of trouble. Now this has been in for 6 days, so these might be, the glue on this tape will have been under a lot of pressure, but actually it seems to be coming off quite well. If you find that it's really stuck and you're thinking you might be pulling out some fibres, then just warm it up very lightly with a hot air gun or a hairdryer, and it will just soften the glue, and then it will peel off very easily, and then you can just clean up the residue with white spirit or meth or something. But that's coming off nice and cleanly. Good. So with my widest chisel, I'm just going to clean off any excess squeeze out from the miters. Slight skew angle, just touch those corners. Okay, so with the mould back in, I'll just true up this top, or the top edges, top and bottom edges. Keep the plane nice and flat and just rotate the workpiece until you're taking a consistent, even cut. In other words, if there's anything out of step, you've brought everything down to a single datum, and then we can check how we're doing with that with the square, and then adjust it as necessary. Check the square, a little bit high on this edge, and that says the same thing, so that's a little bit high there. Just work that, a few strokes in there. Okay, and we're all good. So now I'll back the blade out. Check the setting. I want a super fine setting. So one end in the middle, the other end all cutting evenly. A little bit of wax. Now because they were relatively heavy cuts, I mean they're very fine but heavy, they're sort of cuts are taking some material away. I just need now to dress that, so I've made a super fine setting, and I'll just go around, and you'll probably find that it won't cut everywhere. You see it's not cutting there. Now I can just dress any little peaks, so we have a nice even shaving. Overall, that's got a flat datum on it now. Just need to dress that surface. Right, there we are. Definitely cutting all the way round. Plane isn't rocking, can feel it's nice and flat. There we have it. Very crisp, sharp edges all the way around. And all true. So that's about it for the inner sleeve for the moment. It's all nice and true all the way around on all faces. The ends are all true, both directions. And the plug mould slides through really firmly, but it does do it on both ways round, so it's all nice and square and accurate. So I can put that to one side for the moment, and then we'll work on the actual outer part of the box. This will be cut in half eventually to form the inner sleeve for both boxes, but for now that's pretty much finished. And then for the actual box itself, I've got this piece of elm which I've had for years. It's very awkward to plane. There's knots and pips and grain direction goes all over the place. So it was quite a challenge, but it should look quite interesting. There's lots of colour in it and it's quite nice. So originally this was a board that was about that thick. Cut it down the middle and then planed up both sides. What that allows me is to get a pretty good continuation of grain all around the box. I'll cut it in half, then allow two pieces for the top and bottom lids, which will give me a section like that for both. And then I'll prepare these both to width, and then when I open it up effectively, the grain, so that'll be side 1, side 2, side 3 and side 4, so the grain should wrap itself around relatively seamlessly, and there's bound to be, because it's so figured, it's not going to be a perfect match. If it was something very straight grained, you wouldn't see any misalignment, but we'll do our best. The colours at least should align, and that way we'll get two boxes that look fairly seamless. So to check that you've planed an absolutely straight line on, or a straight cut on both pieces, and you haven't planed too much at the beginning or too much at the end and put a tiny curve on, put them both together and then low down, pinch, and the ends shouldn't open up. Just stay exactly as you left them, nice and closed, regardless of how far down or how far up you pinch. In fact, you should be able to close it up by pinching low down and up there. Set the cutting gauge to the final width that I need plus 1.5 mil, which is just enough for a saw cut and then to clean either face when we cut the box in half. And with my reference edge, just mark that all round and then plane to the line. Okay, so the four pieces are now shot to a little over final dimension, just enough to allow for that saw cut and to clean a tiny amount of each face, which will give us the best match in the grain when we assemble the box again. So if I put them together, there is no discernible difference. Okay, now I've looked through each of the pairs. With a pencil I've marked roughly where the inside groove is going to go, and then I'll need to set my marking gauge to cut a line that the groove will go up to, so it's a nice crisp cut line on the inside face. And to do that, I want the gauge set just ever so slightly over the thickness of our box walls, and we want it ever so slightly over, which means the cut line is ever so slightly greater, so that this distance is ever so slightly greater than the actual wall. So when we put the lid in, the top of the box will be ever so slightly proud, so there's very little to plane off to get it down to a square box. If we made it the same, then we'd have to plane the top and the lid, which we don't really want to be doing. Just a little bit of a correction. Any alignment issues can be taken up with just this top surface. You'll see all that as the box progresses. So when you set that ever so slightly greater, I'll mark my cuts. I'll set the plough plane to that dimension. So the gauge is set to just slightly greater than the thickness of the material. If I put the point right on it, like that, then that would be material thickness, but just a little greater. The point clears the workpiece, so riding on the bevel, so it's just a little bit thicker than the material, and that's plenty. That's all you need. So all the pieces are marked with a crisp gauge line, which will be the bottom edge of the cut. So we get a nice clean cut visible on the inside of the lid. So to cut the groove, I shall be using my old Record 43 plough plane. There are modern versions of these available. And to set it, just break the procedures down into various tasks. So the first thing is set the blade. I'll sharpen the blade, and I'll just check that it's cutting a nice groove. So a little piece of scrap, just cut some grooves, make sure that it's cutting nice and cleanly. And by that I mean that the blade is very narrow, it's only 3mm wide, but it's ever so slightly wider than the thickness of the skate. So it needs to be set so that it effectively protrudes on either side of the skate. And so the skate itself isn't fouling or isn't trying to make the cut and the blade was set off it. Wider blades are easy because obviously they're much wider than the skate, but when you get to the narrow ones, you need to make sure it's absolutely in line, or perfectly in line with the skate, which it is. So set it against the scribe line and just adjust the fence until you're absolutely right on that lowest edge. And then when you think it's set correctly, take a bit of scrap, plough a couple of channel or just a few strokes, define a little channel, then get your cutting gauge, which is still set, and make sure that it's not cutting any more off of the lowest edge. So cutting gauge and channel. Okay, so work holding of thin pieces is always a little tricky, thin and narrow pieces. So in this instance I've got two holdfasts and a scrap which spans two work pieces, so it's nicely held down. Depth stop is set to 4mm. Start at one end and then just make a very shallow cut. Keep working your way back, gradually increasing the length of the cut until you're taking a full width or full length pass, and then keep going until the depth stop touches. Okay, so I'm not cutting anymore. We're all bottomed out. Now if there's any scruffy little bits, any little edges that have dinged, because your cutting gauge is still set, you can just clean up that inside edge, which is the only one that's actually going to be visible. So that's really the only one that we're concentrating on. Although it's nice if they can both look good. Now this is really gnarly old stuff. There's knots in it, the grain direction goes everywhere, so it's quite a fluffy edge on the side that I didn't put the cutting gauge against. That won't be seen because that's hidden inside the box. But if it was really tricky, then I could set another cutting gauge and actually sever make the perimeters cut, or the outside. So the outside and the inside edge, I could cut it with a cutting gauge, both lines, and get a really crisp line. But that's not really necessary. Do that to cut all 8 channels. So when you make the cut, there's no hurry. Just concentrate on keeping the tool nice and straight, so you're not wobbling left to right. Because the actual sides of the blade are doing just as much cutting and should be nice and sharp as well. And just as much cutting as the actual edge of the tool. So if you keep it nice and straight with a nice sharp iron, you'll just cut a very clean, straight, square-sided groove, and carry on working it until you can't cut anymore. So as I'm working it, kind of getting into this circular motion where I make the cut, lift the tool and repeat. You can leave it in the cut and go forwards and backwards, but you have to keep the tool absolutely straight or you'll start messing up your edges as it starts to mangle the cut you've just made. And so what was nice crisp work turns into a bit of a mess. So nice fluid circular path will give you a good result. And there's no rush, just take your time and concentrate on what you're doing. Okay, so this is a good example of what you'll have to deal with. So the grain is running in this direction, so the edge that is on the inside of the box, which is this edge, is very cleanly cut. Really nice crisp edge along here. Yet the edge that is effectively going into the grain, I've got all this stringy horrible mess going on, which isn't an issue because that's not actually going to be seen. So I'll take my chisel, slight skew angle, and just remove some of that. It was only the very first cuts that made the real sort of stringy bits. Now I could set a cutting gauge to the outer edge and cut that again, but it's not seen, so I'm quite happy with that. Okay, so these are all nicely grooved. Now I'm going to inspect them and decide where I take my sections from. So I need 2 sections just over 80mm from each pairing, which will leave 2 pieces on the end, which will become the lids, the top and bottom lids. So this is a pair, got nice clean shot ends on one end. It's already ever so slightly over width to final dimension, so I can use that, align these a length with an end, and then I can mark the top, do the same on the other one, and then when I cut them just the other side of the pencil line, they will also be just ever so slightly over length. There you are. Okay, so these are the 4 pieces, all cut ever so slightly over length. And now back to the mitre shooting board. Shoot mitres on both edges of all 4 pieces and do a nice test fit around our insert. We want it just to be the slightest amount of gap, just to allow the lid to slowly descend when it's closing. You have to take your time doing this If you take too much off, then you'll either have gaps when you come to glue it up, it'll be so tight that the lid won't move, or you have to start taking material off our insert, and we don't want to be doing that. So it's best to get them all to the same length, evenly, cramp it up and see how your fit is. If it literally just drops down, take a little bit more off on all of them, and then just gradually work your way around until you get a nice slow descent. So just cut a 45° on a piece of scrap that I know is parallel. I'll put it in there, and this will just be a little planing fence to protect the edges of the box sides. Make that true, and then when I come to plane these, I won't get any breakout. They'll have nice, crisp edges. Okay, it's just the tiniest flat part just on that edge. That has gone to a mitre, to a point. Fraction of a flat just there. So one more stroke. It's still probably over length, or it will be. Right, and that should have done it. And it has. Okay, so I marked one as the master. Made the other 4 all exactly the same size. I'll put them together when I can't determine that it's any longer, or they're exactly the same length. Then I'll work my way around to make them all absolutely spot on the same. And we can do a test assembly. Finger tight, that's all it needs to begin with. Put them together, and okay, so we are way too loose at the moment. So that is about 1 millimetre too big. So if I can take a little bit off each one, I'll do the master, then I'll correct all the others to exactly the same size. We'll keep doing the process until it's just a sliding fit. Okay, so I've had a couple of goes. We're now pretty much there. So put them on a straight edge, align them all neatly, just touching, a little bit of tension, not too much, just enough to keep them together, but not make them start overlapping each other. Then lift it up, do a wrap, see what we've got. And that's clearly too fast. Just taken literally one pass on each section. So we'll do that again. Do our wrap. Is it any better? That is definitely a little firmer. In fact, you can just hear a pop as he creates a slight vacuum. Still think that's a bit too loose. So we'll do one more. I'll set the blade even finer. One pass on just one side on each, and we'll have another go. Okay, another try. That was an extremely light pass. I'm not sure it really did much at all. But we'll have another go. Okay, so that is spot on. So I can't actually visibly see any gaps, but it's just sliding. I think if I put more tape on it and really pulled it in the corners, it would actually stay put. We should get a nice vacuum pop out of the end. And there we go. So I'll just make the other one now exactly the same size as the master that was on this. So I wrote the little letter M on that piece, and so these are all to the same size. I'll make my next 4 to the other box exactly the same as that, and we should be good to go. Okay, so the boxes, the outer casings are all done to width at least. They're still too tall, and they slide just nicely, but with a tiniest amount of finger pressure I can just put enough force on it just to stop the sleeve from sliding. That's the same for the other one. So it slides, and just pick it up. A little bit of pressure, so that's about where I need it to be. So what I now know is that when I apply the cramps, the cramping pressure, which will really force it together, will almost prevent the insert from sliding, which means I have the very slightest amount of dressing to do on the insert when the box is assembled, just to make the fit a really good piston fit. So happy with that. Then we've got a nice vacuum pop as it comes out. So now I can work on the lids. These are the pieces that were left over from our original length, and we cut the ends off. So the first thing I want to do is on the shooting board, shoot them all down until they're exactly square and they're all exactly the same size. And when I've done that, I'll set my rebate plane, or the rabbet plane, to remove this excess here and a little bit of that size on the top, all the way around until I end up with a square with a very long, small tongue all round. You'll see as I do this. And the tongue will then be shot down, and so the piece sits in our lids, also at the top and bottom part of the boxes, and it should leave just a tiny shadow gap all around and be able to move. It's important that it's not constrained. It can just have the tiniest amount of movement. Right. So check for square, flip them round. It should be square or the same dimension all round for each piece. So this is the setup. I have a block held down, which I've squared up. That's going to act as a bit of a stop, because this is all thin stock, and thin stock is awkward to grip. We've got a spacer, actually an uncut one of the same width, and then the workpiece will go in, hang over the edge just a little bit to avoid any collision. Another block on top, and then the whole thing is pressured up, clamped down. So I shall cut across the grain first. So put the plane on the workpiece up to the fence, and then I shall draw it back and let that nicker blade score a cut. Oops, a few of those, or a couple of those, and I'm happy that I've got a nice defined line. All this breakout is immaterial, that'll all go in the final cut. And then start to make the cut. And that nicker blade will cleanly sever the fibres just before the iron comes along and removes the waste. And when it doesn't cut anymore, you're down to dimension. Test fit with a side, and that's perfect, just what you want. Nice sliding fit. So do the other cross cut, and then the two long grain. So rebate planes are or rabbet planes are an absolute joy to use if they're set up correctly, and a real pain if they're not. So the important parts are the nicker blade is engaged, and I always have mine engaged whether I'm working long grain or cross grain. Because if you're working long grain, a lot of people will say that you don't need to engage the nicker blade to make that incising, that initial like cutting gauge cut. But if you are cutting against the grain and you haven't engaged the nicker blade, then your main iron will just start raking it all out and you'll get a very fluffy, horrible cut. Whereas a nicker blade will sever those fibres regardless of what direction they're going. Then your main blade will come along and remove the waste. So always engage your nicker blade, whatever, and then your main iron, when it's in the track, shouldn't project beyond the line that your nicker blade made. So if it protrudes more this way, then I'll make my incising cut with the nicker, then the main iron comes along and is greater than it, it's just going to obliterate that line and start raking out a whole load of fibres, and it'll be a very scruffy cut. So keep that in line or slightly shallower than the nicker. The rest is just the fences. And then as you're using it, try and concentrate on keeping it upright, not tilted in any way. We'll end up with a sort of an undercut or a chamfer, and your tongue won't be parallel. It will be a sloping cut, which is the common error with them. That's also due to having a blade that isn't set true. So the blade needs to be absolutely true in the iron, not canted at all. We will start to put in a chamfer on your tongue. So these are our lids. You put them on the top of the box. You've got a little bit of play all round, which is effectively the shadow line that's going to be left around the lid and the base when it's all assembled. But at the moment these tongues are too long, they'll foul, the box won't be able to close around them. So I'll set the cutting gauge to take a little off on each side and just mark that all around. So there's our gauge lines. Now I could set the shooting board up, but frankly it's so small that it's hardly worth it. So I'm just going to put a block down and shoot them on the bench. And I'll do the end grain first and then finish with the long grain. So I'll just drop a pencil in the line just so you can see how quick this is. And there you are. Cleanly up to our first line. Do that all four on all four pieces and then we'll assemble it. Okay, so we'll do a dry run. Now when I'm doing these, because they're a matched pair, I like the grain direction of the lids to be the same. So it looks like you've thought about it. Shut line closed. Right. And then just adjust the lid so we get an even shut line all around, which if your lids, tops and bottoms, were square, then you should be able to get an even shut line. If they were slightly off, then you won't. There's another little test for your accuracy of your marking out and your planing. And then you'll end up with two nice crisp boxes that should at the moment be the same height, but this is clearly taller, and that's because when it's glued up we'll be making our saw cut in it all the way around, planing the two faces till they have a very nice crisp shut line. And by the time we've done that, it'll drop it down to the same height as the box on its side. So then they should be the same height all the way around. And once we've severed them and opened them up, then we can cut our sleeve in half and put one in each and see if our piston fit still works. Okay, so I've done my dry run. The cramp blocks are all ready to go, all at the right size. I've inspected every joint and all of these grooves. There are no little bits in there that can foul anything or prevent these from sliding. So just on with the glue, and as before, we just need enough to put a nice even coating on both mating surfaces, but I don't want it all dribbling all over the place. Just enough to do the job. And then on the long grain of the lids, you want a small dob right in the middle of the long grain. So as it shrinks, it can shrink and expand still, and the glue joint there isn't going to move. If you put it on the long grain, it will shrink and expand and it will pop the glue joint. And this will just help keep it in position once you've assembled it all. So long grain up. Put it in roughly centered. Same direction, long grain up. Roughly centered. Assemble the whole thing. I'm really concentrating on this join here, that nothing is overlapping. They're just coming together right on to a peak. They're not slipping one on top of the other. Same for this one, absolutely right on that peak. I can see a little bit of squeeze out already. Go around, check every joint that nothing's overlapping. All looks pretty good. And then center our lids. And I'll drop it into the cramping blocks. And then apply some moderate pressure. I'm not trying to crush the thing, it just needs more than the masking tape can do, but that's really, it doesn't need too much. I don't want the thing to be knocked out of shape. Check anything's moved. No, we're all good. And that's it. Come back tomorrow and take it apart. Glued up, undo the cramps, and let's see what we've got. So I'm just looking to see how the miters are and if anything's obviously untoward or popped out, but it's all looking quite crisp. Nothing's moved, our shut line is still as it was. There we go. Just going to take off those little bits of squeeze out with a flat chisel, so we get back to a nice, clean, crisp edge. Right, and does it wobble? Tiny, tiny amount. There might just be a bit of squeeze out. I need to check the top square. Because they're a little high on that corner. Tiny amount. In fact, I can feel a little bit out of step there. So I'll just plane that down. So what you want to do next is just make the thing back to a cube, because we need it to be effectively back to a nice reference sort of surface all round before we measure the next part, which will be cutting it in half. And if you make everything nice and precise as you're working along, then these little touch-up parts are very small. It's just tiny amounts of work is needed. You're not having to plane meters of the stuff off, just tiny little adjustments here and there. Bring it all back to true again, which is what we need before we move on to the next part. So as you're working around the whole of the project, you need everything to be done as best as you can, to the best of your ability, all the way around, so you're not accumulating compound errors. So before we move on to the next part, everything is redressed and made good. This is a little bit high in these corners still, so just take those down. So my block plane is incredibly finely set. I resharpened the blade yesterday because I knew I was going to be doing this. So while it's all gluing up, I was just prepped for the next part. Extremely finely set, it's set true, so it's cutting evenly. I'm just tickling these corners, bringing it all back to true again. Good. Okay, so the box is as good as I can get it, all back to square. Very happy with all of the dimensions. And now I've got to decide where I'm going to cut it. So the cut line is made a third of the way up. So it's either going to be there or it's going to be there. So I shall look at around the box, see what I might encounter with the saw cut. And there's all these knots that I potentially would be going through, unless I avoided it and did it that way around. Top, there's really not a lot in either of them. So I think we'll do it here, and I will cut straight through those knots, or that little cluster. So I'll get a very sharp, that's not very sharp, I'll just get a very sharp pencil and measure a third up and then 2/3 down. And there. So that is 2/3 and a third of the final dimensions. So that should leave me a tiny amount in between for the saw cut. If I now use my marking gauge or pencil gauge, I'll set that for the two lines all the way around. So this is why you need to prep all of your surfaces, because we're going to use, that is now our reference edge. We're going to be using that to mark our line. So if that was all out of skew, then this part wouldn't work and you just end up with a load more errors. Then using the same reference edge, just the pencil gauge to mark the second line, and these are the boundaries that the saw cut has to be made within. Now this is very, very fine work. If you think this is all just going to be too fine, then of course just make your box bigger to begin with. But because this is all swirly grain, the bigger this cut, the curve that's left, and when the box closes up again, it'll be quite a bit out of step. So if I can take the least amount of material away when I make the cut, then all the grain pattern will be closer to joining up perfectly when it is reassembled. If it's all straight grained, then you can make it any length you like, because it doesn't matter where you cut it when that goes back together, because it's all straight grained, it will still look perfect. So that's a very, very fine cut. So this little tiny gap in the middle is where the blade of the saw has to run, and then if I plane back when it's cut back to these pencil lines, that will give me our final dimension. So that's all I've got to work with. So to make this tiny cut, I need to really support the box so it doesn't move anywhere while I'm making the cut. So my bench is a split top. It has this planing stop designed within it. So I shall engage that, put the box up to the stop, and I'll hold the whole thing down with the hold fast. What I'm going to do is use a block as a bit of a saw guide, just so I don't take too much off. It's such a fine cut, and there's so little margin for error that I need all the help I can get. So I shall put that on there, square it up, then use that as a rest to make the cut, and then I can do that all the way around and it'll be as clean a cut as I can possibly get. So I'm using my dovetail saw. It's the thinnest saw plate blade saw I've got. Tiny amount of set on it. I suppose a Japanese pull saw would be even finer, but I don't use those. It is designed for rip cut, which is exactly what it's doing. So here we go. There's no rush, just take your time. You don't want it bouncing out of the saw cut or you'll just ruin your workpiece. Not a lot of pressure, and let the teeth just do the work. Okay, and we're through. You can hear the note change when you're all the way through, and we're still running smack bang in the middle of those lines, both ends. So that's all good. I'll rotate it around, do all 4 cuts, and then we'll see what we've got. And now for the last cut, and everything's still lining up, which is because of all the time that I've spent ensuring that the box was square before I even started this. Alright, so just that last bit, and there you are. Okay, so now the moment of truth is, will the sleeve, our insert, slide in or drop in? And if it just drops in, then it's game over. But what we want is a tight piston fit, just like that. So that's good, both ways round. Excellent. Right, and a nice reassuring hop. So that's too tight, but that's what I was hoping for. Yeah, it's very easy just to take some of this down, but if it just drops in at the moment, then it's game over. It's just too loose. You can't make it bigger. Perfect, and it works all the way around. So all I need to do now is prepare both of these edges, so when the piece goes back together again, we get as close to an invisible shut line as possible, and at the moment it's nowhere near invisible. It's clearly needs a bit of work. We'll get that so it's really crisp. Okay, so this is the box straight from the saw cuts. I haven't done anything to it yet. It's not too bad. It's fairly cleanly cut. There's no obvious saw cuts at various angles. There's a little bit of a step. Where is it? Just there. Little step there, but it's not too bad. Very little dressing, and this will get back to flat. If I put it together in its correct orientation, and I hold it down, so it's pretty much making a thud sound in all the corners, which is what you'd expect because that is exactly the same mating surfaces. Turn it around, and okay, so now we're rocking all over the place. So it's clearly got some issues. Back to square, and it's thudding. So at this point you might be tempted to turn to the dark side and get some float glass or ply MDF something, put some sandpaper on it and start doing that to try and dress the surface. Well, don't do that. This is a hand tool exercise, and if you did that, you'll just round all these corners off, and what was a very nice crisp box will end up with horrible shadow lines at the at the shut lines because it will be rounded on both surfaces. So instead, you just use a block plane, set it very fine, and work your way around all of the top edges of both the lid and the base until you make a very nice mating fit all round. And what it should sound like and look like is this. So this is the one I've just done. I'll put it down, level it up so it's thudding everywhere. Turn it around. Thuds, thud, thud. So it doesn't rock anywhere, it just sits neatly, and the sort of shut line we're after is something like that all the way around. It's almost invisible. That's all done with the block plane. Okay, so block plane, make sure it's set correctly. So nice sharp iron, and get your little test piece and plane in the middle, one end and the other end. You should have 3 little shavings, equal shavings all the way across the blade. You absolutely need to do that, otherwise you won't know where you're planing. A little bit of wax, and off you go. So to begin with, I'm just going to dress this surface until I get a nice flat datum. We've got about, I don't know, half a mil to play with, which is actually loads. So I'll just keep working this till all those saw cuts have gone. Then I'll caliper it up and make it even all the way around. It's the same height all the way around, and then we're not just planed a big flat slope on it. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. All the steps gone. There's a tiny little bit just in this corner that I need to dress or work on. So if you found that you had a little step or something that was obviously off, don't just plane away at that part until it's disappeared, because you'll just put a big, effectively you'll just lower that too much. Instead, just keep working your way around evenly all the way around the surface until it disappears. And that way you'll just bring all the sides down at a level amount, a nice even datum, and you won't get yourself into a pickle. So at this point, I'll just caliper it up and see if I'm on course or anything's miles out. Okay, and they're all pretty much spot on. Good. It's still ever so slightly oversized, so I can work a little bit more all the way around until those tiny little saw cuts just there. You might see that little white line until that's disappeared. I'm keeping the plane nice and flat and just keep working this whole top edge with the same amount of pressure on every cut. Okay, now that's actually gone now. Okay, that's looking very crisp. Do the thud rock test. Okay, so slightly high there. That's thudding. Right, okay, so there's a little bit more to come off. Just keep working that. Another go. Good. 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 Alright, so now it's thudding, doesn't rock, I don't have that air kind of tap anywhere. Okay, so once we've dressed all of these surfaces, we should end up with two boxes, or two cubes, that don't rock anywhere round. And also, they should be the same height even when one is put on its side, which means that they're definitely cubes. So, moving on, take our sleeve, and that will be set into the base. Obviously, be cut in half, cleaned up on those faces as well, and then our lid should just piston fit. Now, it's a bit tight at the moment, but it's so very close. Just the very slightest amount of work on these edges, and this will just glide down. And it's the difference between like a stroke of the plane between it gliding and sticking. It's so fine, but you'll see that when we get there. This one should be the same. It's just a little sticky, but nice and square. Good. Now you have to be careful when you're doing this. There's not a lot holding this frame together. It's quite strong when it's in the base. At the moment, if you are taking too heavy a cut, you could easily start cracking open your miters, and we don't want to be doing that. Light cuts, keep checking, and you'll get there. So that's all good. Little test fit, put it in our base. That's all good. And then see how far off we are. Okay, so we've got a little way to go. That's a couple of mil, and then a little bit more just to allow for some expansion. Now that's really too small to start sawing off. I can just plane that down until I get there. But it's really getting quite close now. Actually, I could put it in there just to protect it a little more, a bit more support. And off we go again. Okay, so these are now down to dimension. No. And the other one's the same. So that's all done. What I might do is just put a tiny chamfer just on this edge, just to knock that arris off, so it's a little bit nicer to hold, and then glue the sleeves or the inserts into the bases, and then we're done. So this is just a very light stroke. I don't really want to put a big chamfer on it. It's just taking that absolute corner off that edge. That's really all it needs. Tiny amounts. And already it's just nicer to hold. You can just feel there's a slight bevel to it. So just a small amount of glue, really just to locate it. So when you pull the lid up, it doesn't want to just pull up the sleeve. assuming your fit was all nice and crisp. If your fit is very sloppy, then it won't make any difference. Right, let's pop that in. Upside down, I'll just put a weight on there, just for a bit of pressure. So I'll finish up with just adding a very light coat of a penetrative oil. In this case it's refined linseed oil. I get this from art shops, specialist art suppliers. It's extremely easy to apply and it soaks in really very quickly. It will just add a little bit of sheen and give it some protection from moisture absorption and fingerprints and that sort of thing. It's not really a particularly durable finish, but it doesn't need to be in this instance. It's hardly going to have a difficult life. Just brings out the grain and keeps fingerprints at bay, and that's pretty much all we need. So I'll let that sit on it and soak in for a moment and then wipe off any excess. Give it a few days to harden up, then perhaps a little rub over with the cloth just to give it a bit of a burnish, and that's it. And then we'll see how we did with the piston fit. So to finish them off, I didn't have to plane the outside surfaces of the sleeves at all. All I did was put the lid on, push it up and down a few times just to burnish the cherry. I used a crank-handled paring chisel just to clean out any tiny little bits of squeeze out that were present on the inside of the lids. And that was really all the attention they needed to ensure a piston fit. So that's the end of the project. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel and do leave a comment. Coming up next will be the last project in the series, which will be making a pencil case, friction fit pencil case with a lift out tray. But I hope you enjoyed that. I hope to see you on the next one, and thank you for your time.